Okay, so this part of our YouTube series, we're going to be following this trial throughout the season. This is our winter barley BYDV trial. Now we're in the juicy bit. Obviously you'll be thinking that's a bit more than 50% infection as well, John. These crops look absolutely grand. Yeah, we kind of nailed it. I think you're probably right. For those of you who are unaware, we have had since the 1950s some tolerance genetics from Ethiopian spring barley that's been kicking around in the system, and it always had a bit of a penalty with grain quality. So when we had pests that died and sprays that worked, then it kind of got put in the nettles and forgotten about. And then a few years ago our French colleagues started to work with it, and suddenly the whole breeding industry has started to pick it up again and start working with it and bring it into new material. So the main thing is it's a tolerance to BYDV. 5 years ago we started doing work with it where we were just having sprayed and unsprayed areas, and even though we were in the corners of fields where we were potentially quite big BYDV pressure, here in Cambridgeshire as well, early drilled, you know, second week of September, it was quite hit and miss at how much BYDV we got, and we did see an impact of spray and no spray, and it was up to about 20% yield loss on susceptible varieties and was single figures on the tolerant varieties. But we never really got a handle on how much BYDV did we actually have. So last year we were working with an aphid supplier, and we've actually then decided we're going to control the amount of inoculum we put down so we have known infection levels, and that's what we're going to walk through during this series. So we have a range of material in here and different infection levels. So what we're in at the moment is the sprayed area, so this should have 0 BYDV. In theory. Obviously spray windows haven't been great this autumn, so I think we've only got one pyrethroid on here, and if we look in here we've got a discard variety here which looks very similar to this one, so it's probably Orwell. We can see a bit of mildew starting to make the thing go yellow, but it does look like we've still got some BYDV in here. So with some patches down here, and I think there's a very, very clear patch up in this top corner. Again, it started to yellow up, and with some of our earlier footage you will be able to see it looking a bit more distinct. So that is Orwell. We have an English bred 2-row that is susceptible to BYDV, but we've still got some in here even though we've sprayed. This variety is funky, so this is a French bred conventional 6-row. You can see we haven't got the mildew issues that we have with an Orwell, but you can see very clearly that we've still got some BYDV suspicious patches in here that look like BYDV. Also, because it's a 6-row, we've got a lot lower plant count. I should also comment that these trials were drilled at the beginning of the 3rd week of September, and we've got quite low seed rates, so these are at 200 seeds and 250 seeds for the 2-row varieties. So those are our susceptibles. If we move on to these are the KWS current tolerant varieties. You can see they're quite growy. That is because they are French bred, so they are from Mammon, the same stable as Funky. This variety here is Amistar, which has been around in the market for 3 or 4 years now. Not like a lot of these things, when you get the first trait coming into the market, the first varieties are never the best. The yield's a little bit substandard to the highest yielding stuff on the RL that growers are used to, and it's a bit of a suck it and see process in terms of what's the value of the trait, what does it mean for me. So we haven't really seen a big uptake of these varieties, but as you can see here, as a French barley, she's quite early, and one of the best things about Amistar coming from Mammon is because they only do malting barley, it is effectively a failed malter, so the grain quality is amazing, which, considering it's got the tolerant trait that had the poor grain quality linkage, quite amazing to have broken that. But the yield level, when we've done the work in the trials, it's always been around about tower, so 100% on the RL, so it's not really captivated the imagination. This is our RLT, a recommended list candidate, KWS Feeris. This is an Amistar cross, and as you can see, it doesn't quite have the mildew challenges that Amistar does. But what's most interesting about this, being the next one off the pipeline, that this has got a yield at Orwell yield level. So we're up at fairly competitive yield levels on the recommended list, and we've got the tolerance gene. Quite a similar growth habit, as you can see, quite early, quite erect, typically a French cross, but probably not quite as leafy as the Amistar. So as you can see, fantastic looking plots. These have had an aphicide, hopefully have no BYDV in here, and then this should give us our control level in terms of yield performance. So then we move on to the other infection levels. We have got new material in here. We have an issue with a seed stock here, so you can see there are some materials with a very poor germination, so it's not going to be a pretty trial this year. This line that we've got here is a 2-row that's coming along in national list trials, also with BYDV tolerance. As you can see, looks quite early as well, so that's one of interest. And the rest of this is just the replication in the trial. Okay, so now we're in the juicy bit in terms of the inoculated area. So if we look at last year's trials, we saw significant yield reductions. Last year we went for 80% virus infection and 40% virus infection, and yeah, we kind of nailed it. And as you can see on the graphic, we saw yield stability with the tolerant material, not actually losing any yield significantly with the infection levels, and the yields just kind of drop off a cliff. So this year, because of the severe impact, and we thought 80% was probably pushing it, we decided to back our levels down a bit to something a bit more realistic. And so as we go through this trial, on my left here you have an area which is 50% infection. This is the aim, 50% infection, okay? So we have this variety here is Orwell. On this side of the trial, it's the same variety, same order, but we're looking at 20% infection. So hopefully we should have a really nice left and right as we walk through these. So if we come back to here, so this is the 50% infection level. Obviously it's Orwell, so there's a bit of yellowing with the mildew, and you can see 5 yellow markers, and those yellow markers indicate where the barley that was grown in the glass house and was inoculated with aphids and had aphids growing on it, that was grown in plugs, and then they cut that off and laid it in between these rows, and that's where that indicates where the rows were laid. And then obviously a bit of a rubbish year for aphids. What the hope is that they'll move off of those dying plants and onto the living plants next door. We left it a little bit longer before we sprayed them off this year, but it was no more than just over a couple of weeks to do so. So we're looking at hopefully 50% infection. Considering we have discard plots next to us without infection, I'm guessing that we're actually looking at a bit more than 50% infection. Then in the same order that we looked at before, we have funky. Now we saw this last year, and obviously you'll be thinking that's a bit more than 50% infection as well, John. I think you're probably right. We saw this last year, and because it's a French type, it has a very different growth habit to our quiet, sleepy English types. And these plants are actively growing, and my estimations are that the virus has more of an impact because the plant is growing, whereas sleepy old English barley, it's not really having much of an effect. And so we saw quite a lot of plant losses early spring and in the winter last year, and I think, as you can see, we're going to see the same thing again. And considering how that looks with some of the others, we've got quite a high level of infection in here, with the odd plant perhaps unaffected. So we then move on to the tolerant material. So as before, we're looking at Amistar and we're looking at Feeris. So again, the French 6 rows, so again they will be growing vigorously, so potentially the virus could have a bigger impact than it will have on Sleepy English. But as you can see, there might be a few patches of suspicion, but largely looks unaffected. There are some areas where the plants are a bit flatter, but it may well be sowing density. It might well just be an area of thinner plant stand, and the plants are more relaxed and spaced, and where we're a bit thicker, they're competing with each other and looking a bit more erect. But largely we are losing a bit of tip here, and we've got a bit of mildew in the Amistar, but largely looking unaffected considering the level of impact of BYDV infection. These crops look absolutely grand. And if we spin round, I think we've been successful with our 20% infection levels. We have successfully got a lower level of virus suspicion in here. The Orwell looks fairly similar, just maybe slightly a bit less yellow. But if you look at the funky in this plot and that plot, then you can see we've got a lot more healthy plants in here, and probably we've been too successful this year, and our 20% initial level that we're aiming for is probably more like a 40-50 anyway, and our 50's been a bit too good. So that's the funky. As you can see, some very green areas still in here, and then we've got the Amistar and the Feeris. Again, the Amistar looking quite growy, but still rank with a bit of mildew in there, and the Feeris, bit of hair grazing, but is looking really quite nice. So yeah, some big differences that were shown from the very beginning, and some big differences still here. And yeah, we will be following this trial all through the season, so we'll probably look at something, maybe if something changes in this autumn, but certainly then early spring when things start to grow, particularly these French types, will look to grow away from the BYDV, and then obviously mid-season, and when we get to the end at harvest as well. So we'll be looking at this trial quite regularly. So yeah, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our updates on these trials.